When most people think of recycling, they probably just think of separating their plastics, metals, and glass from their other wastes and putting it in the blue bin in front of their house. From here, a truck will take these recyclables to a recycling plant where they will be processed. This, however, is only the recycling of the past 40 to 50 years. Recycling is not a modern activity. Before recycling, in its modern form existed, people recycled through reusing. Recycling became necessary in America during the First and Second World Wars, and it currently exists just in recycling plants. Recycling began as reusing because it was a practical decision. In prehistoric times, when an animal was hunted, its meat could be used for food, its fur could be used as clothing, and its bones could then be made into tools. Before modern times, only the wealthiest families could afford to not reuse their resources. When families still made their own clothing, they would save the scraps and turn them into quilts. And when milkmen used to deliver milk to people's houses, they would collect the glass bottles they had delivered the day before and take them back to use them again. This wasn't really considered recycling in its time, however, because it was just considered being practical, because nobody could afford to waste these valuable resources. My mom used to tell me a story about my great-grandmother and how one day, when they had her over for dinner, my mom cleaned up the kitchen afterwards and threw out broth from the roast they had made. This didn't seem like a big deal to her because she knew if they needed it, they could just go to the store and buy some more. However, for my great-grandmother, who had lived through the Depression, she understood how valuable resources could be, and that this broth could have been used to make gravy for the next meal. This form of recycling through reusing continued for many years in America until the First World War hit, when it became absolutely necessary for America to recycle because resources became very scarce. During the First World War, paper became a very valuable resource, and for the first time, Americans began recycling on a mass scale. All old newspapers, old books, and business papers were being sent to paper mills and were remade into paper that could be used again. This recycling continued a little bit after the First World War and then boomed again during the Second World War. This was because metal was then again scarce. The United States launched a very large recycling campaign, and all scrap metal from people's homes was collected, and this metal could be recycled and turned into ships, tanks, and guns for the American soldiers to use while in Europe. The government launched a large ad campaign for this, and one advertisement even went as far as to say, if you have any scrap metal in your home, you are aiding the Axis, which is a very serious statement. Recycling through this form, which was melting down the metal and turning it into a new product, became very popular at this time, and the necessity for recycling did not end with the wars. Instead, during the 1960s, environmentally conscious people decided that they needed to have recycling so landfills would not overflow. So in 1970, the United States government created the Environmental Protection Agency, and in the same year, they also established Earth Day. And through some of these attempts at making recycling a major part of American life, our modern recycling centers were born. In the 1960s, the growing population of New York City led to a growing landfill sizes and a growing need for recycling. And also because recycling through this process saves energy, it became a very popular method to use during the 70s and 80s. So popular that in 1989, New York City's government made recycling mandatory. And many other cities have followed suit since then, which include San Francisco, just earlier this year, made both recycling and composting a mandatory event. Studies done by the EPA have shown that there are currently over 50,000 recycling centers in America, and these recycling centers employ over 1 million Americans. Along with that, they have also saved over $200 billion worth of valuable resources from going to landfills. Instead, these resources have been sold to companies that can then turn them into new products again. So, although recycling may seem like it was just a modern activity that we've come up with in the past few years, but really it started many, many years ago, almost at the same time as mankind began, because recycling began as reusing. Recycling became absolutely necessary for America during the World Wars, and recycling currently exists in recycling plants.